It's no secret that I generally don't like the Train Sim World add-ons made by the third-party developer called Rivet Games, albeit with at least two exceptions, in the form of their Island Line 2022 and Fife Circle routes. Duds in their catalogue include, but are not limited to, the original Isle of Wight, Arosa Line, S-Bahn Central Schweiz, and ScotRail Express. I initially thought that West Cornwall Local was another one of those duds, and I held off buying this route for the longest time due to my frustration over the poor quality sounds on the included DMU and the lack of a certain branch line. But more recently I thought, you know what, screw it. Some things that were previously thought impossible can still be done eventually. I mean, just look at that new build Peppercorn A1 Pacific for a start. So here I am, reviewing the controversial West Cornwall Local route by Rivet Games. West Cornwall Local was released in November 2021, during the Train Sim World 2 era, and the version compatible with Train Sim World 4 costs $43.59 NZD on Steam. For context, I only play the PC version of TSW and know almost nothing about the console versions. Because I didn't want to pay the full price, I held off buying this route until a sale, and got it at a surprising 60% off as part of the Midweek Madness sale near the end of May 2024. In the end, this route only cost me $17.43. Most TSW routes are set in the 21st century, and more specifically, they're often set post-2010, with Bremen to Oldenburg being the only 2000s-era TSW routes that I can think of. As a break from the modern image tradition, West Cornwall Local is set in the 1990s, but I'm not sure of the specific year. As for route coverage, you get 40 miles of track from Penzance to St Austell, plus the 4-mile-long branch from St Erth to St Ives. St Austell is a really weird place to cut the route coverage, given that it's not a big station. Although I imagine extending the route coverage to Plymouth would have resulted in a heavier workload for Rivet, Plymouth would still be a more sensible place to cut the route coverage than St Austell because it's actually a big station. And I also question why the Falmouth branch wasn't included, since you go past the junction for said branch just outside Truro. The branch would add an extra 12 miles to the route coverage and, consequently, sweeten the deal. As it stands, the section included in the game only features the following stations: Penzance, St Erth, Hale, Camborne, Redruth, Truro, and St Austell, plus the extra stations on the St Ives branch, which are Leyland Saltings, Leyland, Carbis Bay, and St Ives, although, weirdly, zero services call it Leyland Saltings in timetable mode. On the motive power scene, West Cornwall Local includes the Class 150/2 Sprinter diesel multiple unit in the Regional Railways colours, and the Class 37/5 diesel locomotive in a basic rail freight livery without the red stripe. The Class 150 was new to TSW at the time, while we had already got a different Class 37 variant with the Tees Valley line. I should also mention that the West Cornwall Local route also comes with two different types of freight wagon for the Class 37 to haul. These are the YCV Turbot and YGB Seacow wagons. For context, 309 examples of the Class 37 were built between 1960 and 1965, with numerous different subclasses being created over the years through various refurbishments. Interestingly, both the Tees Valley and West Cornwall Class 37s are in the 37/5 subclass, despite having completely different end designs. The refurbished 37/5 was similar to the 37/4, in the sense that both were rewired and fitted with brush traction alternators, but the 37/5 wasn't equipped with electric train heating. The first 21 members of this subclass were originally built with split headcode boxes. These locomotives were renumbered from their original TOPS numbers to the 37501 through 37521 range. As an example, 37516 was previously numbered as 37086, and D6786 before that. As for the version included with the West Cornwall Local route, this depicts the second iteration of the 37-5, which retains the 4-digit headcode box that has been plated over with marker lights. Confusingly, the engines in this batch were renumbered from 37667 to 37699, instead of taking numbers in the 37500 range again. And indeed, while I was exploring this route, I only ever saw the 37 model showing the number 37667 or 37699. Rivet missed a trick by not including the iconic Class 43 high-speed train, otherwise known as the Intercity 125, in West Cornwall Local, since this was a staple of the Cornish Mainline rail scene back in the 90s, and had been since her introduction to the route in 1979. Considering the fact that we now have two variants of the HST in TSW, namely the MTU-powered Great Western Railway and VP185-powered East Midlands Trains variant, I don't think it would be too much to ask to also get a backdated HST model with Valenta sounds and the Intercity livery. It would certainly be a damn sight better than that ridiculous West Cornwall Steam Rail Tour gameplay pack. And that stupid thing is one add-on I still refuse to buy. WCL's Class 37 suffers from the same problem as the Tees Valley 37, in the sense that the modelling on the noses at each end is noticeably off. In other words, the nose is just a little bit too tall. It doesn't help that the plated over centre headcode box and high intensity headlights are placed too high, which results in the locomotive looking rather silly. And for comparison, here is the most recent Class 37 variant we've got in TSW, the Europhoenix Class 37-7, which Dovetail released in March 2023 as part of a gameplay pack for the Southeastern High Speed route. This rendition of the Class 150 has very low quality sounds. From what I gather, Rivet actually used Armstrong Powerhouse recordings, but screwed up the mixing to the point of farce. In TSW, the idle sound is still good, but everything else is just weird. Why does Rivet always end up getting the sounds wrong in one way or another? For comparison, here is the Class 150-2 as she appears in TS Classic. This is the Armstrong Powerhouse version, which was built on the old Thomson/Uve model from 2011. I've also heard of some weird issues with the 150's physics in TSW, but I know very little about the unit's mechanical aspects, so I can't verify exactly what's wrong myself. To top it all off, I heard a few smaller sounds on the 150 that were reused from the Class 483 in Rivet's original Isle of Wight add-on. The most notable sounds are for the cab seats that you can fold up or down, as well as the internal cab doors, as demonstrated here. The 150 has a destination display that's controlled by a hand crank, but the weird thing is that the only options on the blind are stations west of St Austell and nothing further afield like Liskeard or Plymouth. Something else that I noticed when driving the 150 was the complete lack of a guard's buzzer sound after you closed the doors. Timetable mode includes 61 playable services for the Class 150/2 and only 6 for the Class 37/5, although I question why the devs bothered to include the 37 and her freight wagons at all, given the limited number of freight services here. The Class 150 runs the stopping or express services over the Penzance to St Austell section, with a slightly more frequent shuttle along the St Ives branch. Curiously, there are no empty stock moves between Long Rock Depot and St Erth, let alone Penzance, and only 3 ECS services included in the timetable at that. If you've got the Northern Trans-Pennine add-on, the locomotives and coaches from that route will layer onto West Cornwall Local, thus making the rails scene a tiny bit more lively, though not necessarily more realistic. People who own Just Trains' excellent Blackpool Branches route will also see the Class 142 Pacer on WCL in timetable mode, although Pacers were no longer running in Cornwall by the 1990s. For context, 96 Class 142s were built between 1985 and 1987. 13 units were painted in this charming chocolate and cream livery and allocated to Plymouth Lara Depot for use on the surviving Cornish branch lines. But they only lasted 3 years in this part of England due to their long wheelbases and lack of bogies, which did not suit the tightly curved branch lines west of Plymouth. On Flickr, you can find some photographs of Class 142s when they were still running on the St Ives branch, taken in around 1986 and 1987. As a bonus, with having the Northern Trans-Pennine layers active on West Cornwall Local, you can take the Class 37 on some passenger services instead of being restricted to the 6 default services. But this isn't entirely realistic for the 37/5 because, as I said earlier, this particular refurbished variant wasn't equipped with electric train heating. It takes around 56 or 60 minutes to complete a full run from Penzance to St Austell, and the rail scene on this route still feels pretty quiet, even with the other layers active. Most of the time, you're only seeing other 150s on the main line, along with Class 08s, Mark 1 BG coaches or YGB and YCV wagons in the sidings. Meanwhile, the yard at Burngallow Junction, at least I think it's called Burngallow Junction, is completely empty. I guess the good thing is that the route runs very smoothly, at least on my end. Oftentimes I was getting between 90 and 120 frames per second. The signal blocks are unusually long on this route, which can result in your train being held at a red signal for an unreasonably long time. For example, when I tried driving the 10:30 Penzance to St Austell service, I was held at a red signal outside St Erth for so long that, by the time it finally changed to green, only 20 seconds were left before my expected arrival time at Hale. I ended up running around 2 to 4 minutes late for the rest of the journey. I found that the journey from Penzance to St Austell, and vice versa, is quite boring because of the bad scenery details and long distances between station stops, especially east of Red Ruth, and this leaves you with not a whole lot to do as you're driving along. It makes Rivet's decision to extend the route coverage to St Austell instead of Falmouth all the more questionable. I had a pretty bad first impression of West Cornwall Local's default scenery. I think it makes the route look very basic and much older than it actually is, a reminder of the fact that it was only released in 2021, but looks more like an ancient TS Classic route from 2010 or earlier. There are several cases of bad scenery throughout the route, but for the sake of my sanity, I won't discuss every single case. I seem to recall seeing photographs of a sign at Penzance in real life, engraved onto which is a message in both English and Cornish, but the sign is nowhere to be seen in-game. The immersion at Penzance is somewhat hindered by the lack of any interior details for the ticket office and buffet bar, which are located under the overall roof by platforms 1, 2 and 3. Not helping the situation is this depiction of the nearby Long Rock Beach, which looks absolutely deserted. For whatever reason, it looks like all the water has drained away from the Hale estuary. This sticks out like a sore thumb, and it wouldn't be such a big problem if you couldn't easily see it when you're standing on the platforms at Leyland or Leyland Saltings. At Carbis Bay Station, you can clearly see a building that has been copied and pasted 6 times along Carrick Gladden, and this building doesn't look anything like what you'd see there in real life. Meanwhile, the NPCs do not touch the ground as they walk, or rather glide, down the path to the station. Just like Long Rock Beach, this one near Beach Road and Carbis Bay Station also looks unrealistically quiet. On the other side of the railway bridge, the road just ends abruptly in front of 2 houses on a hillside with very basic details. Porthminster Beach is visible from the platform at St Ives Station, and Rivet's depiction doesn't look too much better than the ones back at Carbis Bay and Penzance, even featuring the same windbreaks and umbrellas scattered about the place. But it still feels lifeless due to the complete lack of any NPCs on the sand. Maybe they've all gone off to see the Niedertalbahn, you know, a route that's actually good, despite being shorter than WCL. This rendition of the Trevu Road crossing at Camborne could give Reigate a run for its money. For context, Dovetail's original rendition of this crossing on the London commuter route had no detail in its default state, and this crossing at Camborne, not to mention the nearby streets and buildings, is similarly basic. Meanwhile, the crossing at the eastern end of Truro Station looks just as basic, if not worse, than the one at Camborne. I took all those screenshots of the poor scenery before recording the footage for this review. All of said footage was recorded after I installed a scenery patch from the TrainSim community website, links in the description. I found out about this patch through TB76 Returns and one of his community posts. This patch substantially improves the scenery on WCL by adding better vegetation in several places, more details at the old Morasian station site, and a more realistic depiction of the level crossings between Hale and Camborne, amongst other improvements. Aside from the decent modelling on the Class 150, as well as the station buildings at Camborne, Truro and St Austell, there's really not much that I actually like about this route. While there is that scenery patch that I mentioned earlier, console players will still have to deal with the bad default scenery because mods are only compatible with the PC version of TSW, and I pity the console players. In any case, the route sure as hell isn't worth $43.59 NZD, and I'm glad that I only paid $17.43 for it. This add-on is quite literally not up to par. As for improvements that Rivet could and should have made, the first one would be to extend the route coverage to Falmouth, or better yet, Plymouth, followed by overhauling the Class 150's audio so that it doesn't sound absolutely rubbish, and thirdly, by making a gameplay pack that includes the long overdue Valenta-powered HST in the Intercity livery. As it stands now, I can't recommend Rivet Games' West Cornwall Local route to anyone, and I'll summarise my thoughts on Rivet as a whole with a quote from Brett Cooper. "These people confuse me on a daily basis."